Farm4Profit podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm4Profit podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm4Profit podcast.
And listeners, welcome back to the Farm4Profit podcast. We got Tanner sitting here on a trailer.
Corey's here.
Dave's here, and a special guest.
That's right. We are excited to do a live on-the-site recording out here at the Stockcropper Field Day. And we are probably now the first time recording off the flatbed of a trailer.
So we've been on a train, we've been on a plane,
been now on a trailer.
in a hotel lobby, and on a trailer, on the flatbed.
Planes, trains, and automobiles.
I like this.
And trailers.
Yeah, this is exciting. We're excited to have you guys tune into us. We thank you so much for listening. We appreciate all that you've done for this podcast. Continue to share this with your friends, especially if this is the first time that you found us. We have two different show formats. Today we're going to have a Farm4Fun conversation. Typically we crack a couple of beers, and we're sitting here without a beer in our hand. Maybe that comes a little bit later today. But we also have profit shows that come out on Monday or every other show in your queue, and those are a little bit more focused on something to help your farm make more money. Where the fun show today, we're going to spend our time getting to learn more about an individual and maybe pull away some techniques or some tips just through casual conversation.
And I don't know if we stopped doing this, but if you're not, make sure you like, rate, review. We need the reviews. Give us 5 stars and whatever comments you want.
I do love the comments. Don't forget to send us a text message if you got an idea or a guest, 515-207-9640. Those are fun. I get to see them first before I send them on to these guys, so it's kind of a little fun game for me to play.
Vance, is that apple good?
We are having a little bit of fun, if you can't tell. So, Corey, why don't you jump into introducing our guest today? We're going to have to imagine our music. I'll overlay this when we get
Drum
started.
roll, please. Today on the Farm4Fun show, we are up in north central Iowa, Buffalo Center to be exact, at the Stockcropper Field Day. We meet up with a friend of the podcast, like I said, here at the Farm Weird Field Day. This man has a brain that's constantly ticking outside the box, where he constantly fills Twitter or X with his ideas about his business, Constant Canopy. From relay cropping to yard golf, this guy is one of the best follows on Twitter. Please welcome, from Gaston, Indiana, Mr. Jason Mauck.
All right! Woo, woo, woo!
You're supposed to clap out there, Vance.
We have a packed crowd.
Yes.
Not a single one of them.
We are doing this
clapped.
before the field day actually starts, so like no one's here, just Vance Grow.
It's a test run on the equipment.
Jason's biggest fan, Tanner's biggest fan. So welcome to the show, Jason. Back to the show, I should say.
Thanks for I'm just uber. I've just been looking forward to this my whole life. Thank you.
The field day or the podcast?
We paid him to say that.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, we had you speak at our conferences before we actually started recording a podcast, and then we had you on when we were audio only. We had to do a phone call, which those weren't super prime content.
It's been, what, 4 years?
Probably 4 years.
4 years back, yeah.
Why don't you reintroduce yourself to our listeners? Who's Jason?
Okay, who's Jason is a 43-year-old white male. Lost 24 pounds this summer, eating clean. I'm a family farmer. I think I'm the 5th generation. I get curious. Sometimes it hurts me a little bit. I did a meat company deal a few years back. But we've got about 3,000 acres we farm, a lot of pigs, a lot of manure. And what makes me weird, if you will, is my mom said, hey, there's no money in farming, go get a real job. So I got a marketing degree, went to the city, suit and tie, learned how to sell, start a business, and then my dad passed of cancer, and they just ripped me right out of that world into the farm world. So it just 10 years of different experience brought into that, just probably the root of the weirdness.
And probably the biggest follow that most people know you for, at least in the Twitter sphere, or sometimes you're on Facebook and other places too, but would be your relay cropping, right? You're always constantly talking about that and different angles of light and trying to make the most of space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was a pretty hardcore landscape contractor in my 20s. I took my sales skills and I got people on paper, and I built a pretty decent business with a lot of college kids' employment. I had a lot of horsepower, and we did a lot of landscapes. And then, like I said, I was ripped out of. I had about a $600,000 book of business with a group of friends, and then they said, "Hey, farm 3,000 acres." And Dad was here and gone, and it was my crop. And pain teaches. That's the thing. And I think, a lot of times we meet at places like this, hey, crops look like crap, everything looks good or bad. And I had some really bad crops that I was responsible for early on from weather. And intercropping, relay cropping, to me, is a way to use my useless skills of landscaping and farming. And as I've became experienced in it, I really feel like I have somewhat of a handle when Mother Nature goes batshit crazy a little bit. So that's why I love it, and just the productivity and efficiency that I see in a lot of things. There.
So when was it that you came back and took over the farm?
2010 was when we found out my dad, and he passed April of 2011. So over the course of that fall. And then 2011 back home, just short story, it was like the worst monsoon ever. We got like 50 inches of rain, and I couldn't get a wheel turned, and I ended up planting in the mud. And the people that waited had a decent crop, and then 12 was a drought. So it was just like, I helped out on the farm. I was the dumb cowboy sort board guy in the pig barn, so that was kind of my skill, and helped out. But it was just my crop to screw up or whatever, because my dad was such a leader. He was such an asshole in a good way, but he kept everyone, like, if you screwed up, you would know about it from my dad, and he was gone. So they kind of looked at me to figure it out.
And I've always known you on social anyways. The short amount of times we've met is innovation. Always looking for the next idea, and I think that's kind of what spurred Constant Canopy, correct?
Yeah, Constant Canopy is basically the Twitter manifestation of the relationships and stuff like that. And I met a guy locally, and that name actually came from Joe Bassett when we were first kind of drinking beer and hanging out and stuff. And it was part of another. I was going to call it Occupy. This idea of cover crops and cash crops always kind of occupying the space. And it was Constant Canopy Unleashes Progress, and he's like, Constant Canopy, that's it. So that's just kind of how that started. And now I talk about making gaps, so it has some. It's not a full canopy all the time.
But that's the evolution.
Yes.
That's how, because I'm curious if your dad passed, that's most of the time these farmers, their mentor is their parent.
Yeah.
And you didn't have that. So how have you taught yourself? I mean, you were looking at the clouds earlier, making sure we didn't start this recording until they came over and cooled us off a little bit. But you understand weather, you understand the agronomics, you understand the finance side, the marketing side. Obviously, you got a degree in marketing.
Yeah.
But how have you learned the rest of it?
I'm a dork. My oldest is a dork like me. I would lock myself in the room and remember baseball cards and stuff. And then as the internet came along, I'm that rare age where I had the old school castrate pigs and throw testicles at your cousin to we're AI everything now. This election cycle is crazy with all the AI and everything. But anyway, I came on when the internet was coming, so I came in love with computer models for weather. And I just became so dorked out on predicting my own forecast, and that manifested into the cropping system where I enjoy chaos, and I like to look at chaos, and I like to look at the response of not just the plant, but the soil and the grasshoppers and the winds and the sun angles and the shadows and where the frost melts off and how the shadow, and I'm just always in this my own little weird dorky world. And I found Twitter as I'm going to get really weird on you here, but when I was little, I had an imaginary friend named Poey that lived in my belly button.
Whoa, okay.
And when I was doing my dorky shit,
Poey.
I think the Twitter thing is my Poey.
Okay.
I'm I'm out here thinking about this stuff. I might as well make a video.
Yeah.
And my wife was when I first got on Twitter, she's you are doing this all wrong. No, you are weird. No one wants to listen to you for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And I just kept doing it.
But it's also kind of like your diary as well. You can keep notes that way.
Yeah, it's very effective journaling.
Yeah.
Just seeing what
So were you on Twitter before you started the weird stuff?
No.
Or were you
that
weird
was,
and then Twitter?
No, I didn't really have any social media, and then I started doing that.
Okay.
And then I started meeting all you yahoos and
Yeah.
traveling around, and it's just been fun.
So for people
my
who aren't on Twitter or haven't seen your videos, what is relay cropping? What mostly do you do?
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors, Brandt Agricultural Products.
Brandt DXT grain carts have efficient unload speeds, large carrying capacities, and unmatched durability.
These dual auger carts deliver faster and more thorough cleanout with quicker turnarounds to keep your operation running smoothly. And reliable components make sure your cart is working when you are.
Lead the field with DXT carts from Brandt. Visit brandt.ca for more information.
So the definition of relay cropping is basically starting another crop while another crop is growing. Relay, I mean, poly is growing basically two at once. And, it's a sequencing and from a marketing degree or economics degree, I loved economics, the supply and demand curves. And I think a lot of our problems are we're not reflecting on our landscape, what's happening with the weather and our precipitation and our heat and everything like that. So for me, relay cropping is being in position. I may be too colorful for this, but I hate being a bitch, if you will. I feel out of place if I don't have a crop that's rooted into the ground to kind of play off of. And when I was a landscaper, I had hundreds of acres of turf and beds and I had to keep everyone's place upkeeped. And I see what happens with water hemp, especially the last 3 or 4 years. It's like our tools are just turning into like air BB guns anymore. And I think it's going to go back to the basics of longer rotations, of canopy, of suppression. And we've got to kind of solve these problems like old school shit, because our new school shit only lasts like 3 or 4, 5 or 6 years, and then it's like nothing.
Yeah, it's coming so fast. I sell seed. I was at a seed day, and they were talking about technology that's coming not next year, 10 years down the road. And we were talking about Enlist for, so we could use 2,4-D on spraying on beans, and now we're going to be able to spray it in corn and all that. And they're like, guys, we know this is already being a problem, not solving it. We have to get by for the next 8 to 10 years before the next technology is here. So I was like, that's not good. That's too long.
Yeah, and in a way, it makes all of this stuff a lot of this stuff that you'll see today that you can scale easier, because, I mean, look at that. You can spray dicamba, 2,4-D, Roundup. You can spray Metrotrion on beans soon.
Mesotrione.
Yeah, like the corn herbicide. Yep. So these stuff isn't really that complicated, but it goes back to harvesting the water and the sunlight. These free things that there's no reason why you should have a field day to sell air or time or space or water or hog shit or how to use it more effectively. But to me, going back to my story, my family is the most conservative family. Like, squeeze the buffalo and make it fart.
Yeah.
Like anything I spend any money.
Sounds like Tanner.
With Grandpa, it was just impossible. So I just learned how to, ask for permission or forgiveness way more before permission, because it would never happen. So the relay cropping is like, I have an idea to solve a problem, whether it's not have the water wreck our crop or stop the water hemp from spraying. I'm going to go out on a limb and try this shit and figure it out. And then eventually the people that, especially my direct family or locals, they'll eventually start doing it. And we're seeing that.
I was going to ask, I wanted to save that question for a little bit later as to how many people have started doing what you've been doing. But I want you to step through for the listener that doesn't know and hasn't seen it. Mm-hmm. So you have the right geographical location that allows you to grow wheat, and you're seeding winter wheat?
Yes.
Explain what your process looks like.
So ideally, how we set it up, we grow primarily corn and soybeans, and we've got wheat acres, but we'll plant an earlier maturity corn. We're 20-inch corn, and we found that we can raise a little bit earlier corn at higher densities and get that yield right up there with a full season corn. So we try to get that off at 23, 25%, shell it off late September, and then we're planting wheat in strips. And I've done a million different ways. We primarily drill the wheat. We're going to be planting it with a planter this year, but I've planted it also with our hog manure tank and planted it above the manure, which I think is a fantastic idea. I just need Bill Gates or somebody to cut me a check to actually design a manure seeder. But basically what we can do with our hog manure is we have a static, very fertile soils. Even if we don't put manure on it for 10 years, our P and K levels are going to be up. So we can basically just put nitrogen where we want to kind of foster tillering of the wheat. Sometimes we follow manure, but most of the time not. And we plant reduced populations. And that's a big thing that I learned as a marketer. And I think America is this, sorry if this hurts anybody's feelings, but the whole marketing circus is just with holidays and everything. It's just to corral people to exploit, fireworks and just up the valuation of everything, just make sure everyone does their routine. And agriculture is no different. And we meet at all these field days and figure out, how can we gain 5 to 7 bushels with a monocrop? And what you can do with slope curve is you can do exactly what you can do with selling fireworks, of saying, I'm going to buy this cheap Chinese piece of crap firework for $2, and I get people horny enough June 31st to come, or June 30th, and spend, 500% more than I paid for it and exploit that. And we can do that with a single seed, where if we plant like 25% of the wheat, I can get about 75, 80% of the yield. But what I am more interested in is consuming and getting ahead on the demand curve of water. And I know I'm getting way ahead of your simple question here, but I can get ahead on the water curve to where I have a water equilibrium. And that's what actually makes plants grow well, is balance much more than throwing the kitchen sink at things.
Yeah, I think Dave witnessed that first thing this year. His first year farming, and his field's wet.
Yeah.
Very, very wet. And he realized that installing tile is going to be extremely beneficial to him to hit that water equilibrium.
And everybody was worried it was too dry, and then some is too wet. It's the old too wet, it's too dry, and I still want a free hat.
Yeah.
But the equilibrium of just being we always love those rains that aren't. I remember you called me one day, Corey. It's like, this sucks. Turn the damn water off. We're ready to go. Water's good, but too much of it was bad. There was a happy medium in the middle.
Too much in our soils hurts.
Yeah.
We would rather be on the edge of dry.
Yes.
Not drought, but edge of dry.
Yeah.
So you're short season corn, and then you plant lower population wheat.
In strips, and we've been on 60s. I might change that up a little bit more narrow. I think 30 is too narrow. And it's all a shadow effect, where I'm 6 foot tall. My shadow is going to cast so far. So wheat's only about 32 inches tall or whatever it is. So it's going to cast so big of a shadow. Now, when you put it in the big wide strips, it changes its motive, because no longer it has to grow up to compete against all the other wheat. It can grow laterally sideways. And that's where we create the additional yield, is capturing the drivers in different shapes and lengths of time. So the wheat is, each plant is going to tiller, and the tillers in a competition of field can't go up and actually reach that sun, so it actually drags energy down, where the tillers can go out and figure out a way to capture light, and then that brings that back to the plant. So I'm only putting like $15 worth of wheat out there, and then it all works off of a proxy system, where it's like our mics. If you went out there 200, 300 yards, you couldn't hear me anymore. I want to put that bean right off of that big root mass so far, so the beans aren't the bitch again of the wheat,
right,
but it's in a favorable position where it can breathe, but then have access to more of a reservoir of water. So that's just taking time of messing with the densities, messing with how much I push the wheat, because all this stuff, if you get too aggressive of one thing, you can have your ego ruins it, because you're so worried about impressing someone on the first part, but then you shit the bed on the second part, so there's no reason to do it in the first place. So we plant the beans in between there, we get a big solar corridor, and that's changed over the years. Early wheat to pot, early as of cereal as possible, the better. Full season beans, big splits. And, we've raised really good soybeans this way. And if I was in a yield contest, I would start with strips of cereals, if nothing else, just to reflect the sunlight off the ground.
How much of this is you just, as you said, dorking out on it? Or does it make any more money? So when I look at it, I don't have a whole lot more time. So I'm like, all right, what is everybody doing? What's the basics? And just do the basics. But we've got the opportunity to interview hundreds of people that all have a different way to make 2 more bushel, 2 more something. Is this you just really like the science of it, or are we making more money?
We spend a lot less money on the makers, and we produce just as much or more revenue than high-yielding corn that gives everyone boners.
Gotcha.
So, like, you get it has to be the perfect year to get that field average of corn up there 250, 275. Like, you can't have the holes, you can't have yellow spots, you can't have deers procreating in the corner. Yeah. And if I go out there and I put $15 a wheat, I can lower my herbicide, I get good full season, full yield beans, then you add those two together and I do all my costs. The other thing with corn that people rarely talk about, and it's getting worse and worse, you know, we had a feed mill 2 miles north that we take most of our corn, but that's kind of going away. A lot of people have to truck their corn 20 miles. And you take the logistics of drying all those bushels, moving all those bushels multiple times, and all the work. I mean, that can add up to $50 to $100, $150 an acre and just dicking with it. And less bushels. My formula is if I can produce the same amount of wheat bushels as bean bushels in that 70, 70, 80, 80, then each bushel that I sell as a commodity is worth 2x of that of corn. So if I do 150 collectively, that's the same as 300 bushel corn, and I can grow this for half the cost of 300 bushel corn. So, I mean, no bullshit aside, $200 to $300 per acre pretty easily.
So you started off with the manure tank, and you were putting a strip of, because it was a splash plate, right?
Yep.
And it was,
well, no, I was actually injecting at knife. And
really?
I took off every other knife. So I was taking 60 inches and just driving as fast as I can, blowing as much shit as I can.
But the wheat was coming off splash plate.
And
right?
I had a Gandy box that was dropped, and I splashed it into the closing wheels.
Yep. And so how wide of strip was that wheat?
60 inch.
60 inches between, but the actual row was probably of wheat.
12 inches?
Yeah, it was wider.
Yeah, it was about 20.
Okay.
And now you said you were at 30-inch wheat, correct?
So now I'm going
to
probably 45.
45. But planted.
Planted,
So it'll be just a single row of wheat.
Well, no, it'll be 15 inches wide.
Okay, you'll still plash it.
Right now it's 60 and 22 inches wide with my drill.
Okay, and then you got a bean plant on either side of that?
Yep. And we're probably going to go to zero space soybeans to where this is all an evolution of eventually, and it might take 2 or 3 years to where we do if you remember, I think it was Chuck Woolery on Love Connection. You guys are probably too young for that.
I don't know that. Nope.
Okay, they always say I'm back in 2 and 2, and I always like 2 plus 2s, but basically making a machine that seeds, sprays, tills, side dresses all in one pass. Because looking at this, if I design the right equipment, I can make this less work than monocrops, simply because I'm managing the landscape with plants.
Seeds, sprays, tills, and what was the fourth one?
Back rubs.
Fertilizes. So
fertilizes. All
you
at one
imagine
time.
you got these wheat strips, you come out there, you're doing like a little concave disc out ahead that cuts up right up to the wheat, and you have some kind of hoe drill that places the soil in the ground and does a little bit of shallow cultivation behind it, a little bit of ET leveling, and then you've got a Y drop that's nitrogen, putting nitrogen on your wheat, and then you're hood spraying behind your beans. So if you zero space them and you plant zero space and only like 45, 50, 60% of the landscape, then those plants will expedite canopy closure. It'll have the ancillary benefits of the wheat, and then that'll make you to harvest, and then we're clean slate. Because my problem is I'm spraying my monocrop beans, at least 3 times, if not 4 times, because I'm trying to get a baby from birth, from the fetus to the baby, and it's 6 weeks before I have anything significant out there as far as defending the soil surface. So that's the whole point to me on these multiple crops is let's get reduced densities, but things out there to manage what makes me spend money.
Mm-hmm.
So zero spacing, you mean so in between your 45 inches of wheat, there's
45-inch zero space.
So then you're going to have beans that fill up the gap in between the next row.
Yep, and the
Solid
great thing
seeding.
about that is every inch is different. So when I'm right in the center of the row, I have the most water availability.
Yes.
So those beans will grow the tallest right out of the gate. The ones close to the wheat will be like, it's kind of down. But when the wheat dies that day, like in June 20th, it's like, hell yeah. It's like Home Alone. Like, the kids are gone, the ice cream's full in the freezer, hell yeah. And those beans live in the corpse of the cereal, and they turn into these like Gary Coleman on roids, like these little midget beans with 300 pods.
We're getting canceled for this show.
And it turns into this beautiful algo. And you're looking at the wheat like, okay, the wheat only made 70, but I only had, $80 in total cost. That's harvest and everything. So I have a contribution margin here. I take my contribution margin and I compare that to any inflection point on the soybeans, and then I overlay my cost of production on soybeans. And a lot of times the cost of production savings is much over than the inflection, and then you add the contribution margin, that's where we come in the 200, 300 easily. But the whole manure application in the fall, if I can not lose that value, get it in a plant and morph it,
So does this only work for those that have access to manure?
No, and I do a lot of acres without manure just to prove it. And it's actually easier to grow better wheat because I don't have those like cocaine rails all over the field where I have this crazy bushed out wheat. It's kind of not ideal because I have to worry about lodging. So I might even cut it back even further on my manure wheat. I would rather use regular nitrogen and have.
And you get the tax write-off for R&D.
That's right.
That show's not out yet.
That show's not out yet.
That's one of those you need to stay tuned. There's going to be some great
You can write
value
your
coming at the end of the
no,
month.
You can't write it off. You have a tax credit on your whole
Tax
farm.
credit, yeah, when you make money.
Yeah, that's we do need to connect them with Jason. I think that would be a pretty easy connection. But
Yeah.
yes, here in about a month there'll be a good episode that comes out, and you're going to really like that, listeners. But
What's the biggest pushback
Yeah,
you
go ahead.
have? What's the biggest pushback you have from people on the socials that saying hey, you can't do that because of this or whatever?
Easy times. That's the biggest pushback. If corn's $6, then I could have a call center just calling and sending out letters. Hey, I'll pay you $400, $500 cash rent. Everything's cherry because I have equity with Grandpa. I have crop insurance coming in. I can back up the shortstop here, there, and there. But when corn goes to $325 and it's not Candyland anymore, it's like, oh shit, I gotta be resourceful. And I think as evil, Dr. Evil as it sounds, I'm kind of excited about it being a little tougher maybe sometimes.
So I found myself getting down too, but that's like, no, this is what we want, right? If we're the best managers, that there's opportunity in this, right? Because the guys that built, right?
It's not gonna
But
last.
I think the biggest, I'm not gonna say pushback, but when I look at your comments and things, it's always questions about how do you harvest it? How do you harvest the wheat if there are beans out there?
Yeah, so that's trial and error. We didn't have any equipment the first few years, and then we teamed up with a company called Flexi Finger. There's a pad that goes on to my cutter bar, so I basically make the beans do a limbo, and I have pushed that. When we had the 108 bushel soybeans, they were over 2 foot tall, and we bend them down to 6 or 8 inches to bring those wheat heads in, and they'll bend and they'll come back. But it's just managing your combine traffic. So the people on Twitter really gave me shit early because I had all my kids' crayons out, but my kids were 9 months old when I'm doing all this early stuff, and you have to draw out the schematics and have you have to be a year or two ahead of what you do in the field and figure all that shit out, because the last thing you want to do is go out and plant a bunch of stuff and then not figure that out.
Yeah,
So that's everything.
You did maybe you still do a lot of posting with a chalkboard, right? In the kitchen?
Yes, a lot of chalk talks. I don't do as much as I used to, but I especially before I got into the meat stuff, I was really trying to figure out what industry I wanted to get in, and the cropping stuff. And you got to do that. I mean, I encourage everybody, if you got a group of creative friends, start writing stuff down, because a lot of times you'll get on a tangent, and you need the best friend that you have is like, hey, this won't work because of this. You don't think of it.
So you were thrown into this, it kind of sounds like, when your father passed, and you were going a different direction. Are you happy you went back this direction, or are there other things you want to chase, landscaping, marketing, something new?
No, not really. Man, it was quite the life in my 20s because I could just kick ass for like 3 or 4 months. And then there's so much more time for vacation and golf and all that stuff. So that's the one thing I do miss about life outside the farm.
But you brought some of that to you because you have a golf course at your place.
Yes. And my kids are 8 and 9 now, so they're out there playing, and that's really fun. But yeah,
How do you have time to maintain a golf course?
Knowledge. I mean, what's bad is good. All the golf courses have went belly up around me, so I have auctions, and we can buy all these. Like, I have 3 17-foot reel mowers, so I can mow 8 acres of fairway and like 2 beers, basically.
I like time with beer.
It becomes a hobby, right? I just know what it takes to maintain a green, and
Yeah. So my hose never shuts off from like mid-May till September. If we run over a few with the semis, I might get a hole in one, but I just have like 15 from Rural King, and then I got a route. I'll put it around my gator, and I'll drive around this tree, and I just drag a hose, and it's just always on. It makes your greens receptive so you can score well.
That's true. That's very true. But I just know you got to mow those every day, at least every other day at least.
Yeah, you can let them go a little bit longer if you want. But I got a rider now. I had like 6 different walking greens mowers. They were all kind of POSs, but I kept them up, and I just leave them outside next to a tree, next to a green. It wasn't too hard.
So
I enjoy it.
let's talk about some of your failures, because I know you didn't just do the relay cropping and wheat and beans. You had some corn stuff, wide rows, the meat business. Where do you want to start there?
I don't know. The meat thing was maybe a little ambitious. I'm glad that I did it. You know, a lot of people will run away from failure, but I think it's very good to get people together on an idea. There's a lot of people that I work with that I still talk to today, and I think there'll be something else. But we gotta have people that are willing to fail to figure things out, because I'm not as what's the word? I'm not as religious of community centric as maybe I was 3 years ago, because I see the pain involved. But we've got to get more food on a local level, distribution infrastructure wise.
And now a quick word from one of our sponsors, Brandt Agricultural Products.
Reach farther and work smarter with Brandt XT grain carts.
Unloading grain has never been easier with unmatched auger visibility, 4-direction spout control, and complete grain tank cleanout. So you can unload fast and fill the truck evenly, worry-free.
Lead the field and keep your combines moving with the XT grain carts from Brandt.
Visit brandt.ca for more information.
What was the meat project?
So we bought a company during COVID that basically is called Muncie Meats from 1957. They had the McDonald's contract. They had the Burger King contract in the 60s. They were doing like $15 million in the 70s. And then the guy stuck around and basically held on to all the local restaurants. But COVID happened and all the restaurants were closed. So he was old and he wanted out. So we bought it for like next to nothing. And I was pretty ambitious. I wanted to kind of create a slaughterhouse constellation stars for farmers, to connect farmers to consumers, and use the restaurant business as a node to gain economies of scale, to build the infrastructure in place and the connections to make that a reality for farmers. And I thought I could leverage my social media to help facilitate brands for people. Because you know, if you make a good brand and you're connecting people across state, a lot of it's going to come where you got to distribute that. And we made a run. We were at it for 3 years, but we were a USDA facility, so we had an office there. And if whenever I thought I had money in the bank account, the guy would come out and say, "Hey, you need to spend $100,000 fixing this, or we'll shut you down." Or it was just like being married to a gold digging. I don't know.
Right.
It was tough, aside from the personnel there. I was at the big one.
What I thought the coolest part of that was you had meat vending machines.
Yes.
And
that worked very well.
That was cool.
Yeah.
I think you were almost ahead of your time for it, because I think that would work right.
Yeah. It was once the people started doing it, it was intimidating at first. That was the biggest hurdle, is they had to be aware, they had to know how it works. So it was you were kind of in your own fishbowl, and you needed to make your fishbowl bigger of awareness. But we called it the automated farmers market, and people would order online. We would put it in the machine. The machine would actually send a QR code via text and email to the consumer. And we were moving over 10 orders a day. Our average order was $80. So it was decent revenue, but it was a spoke of a much bigger business. And the much bigger business was more into wholesale with smaller margins and scale. And it's just hard to get the transactions of the Meijer and the Walmart. If you had 10% of their meat transactions, you would have it made.
I think you just got to hit that time right, because I think back to laser discs. They were way more space than a CD or a Blu-ray or a DVD, but they might have been ahead of their time. And by the time we needed that much space, well, then direct downloads were there, or SSD hard drives were there. That's in the technology space as an example of what that looks like. Even think of Redbox. I mean, I remember thinking, like, this
finally went down.
Yeah, it finally went down. They had a vending machine. I'm like, who's going to do this and bring it back? And then it just kind of took off. But they pivoted, and it's more Netflix-ish. Mm-hmm. And now look at Netflix. So they just happened to hit it right at the right time and know when to pivot.
Yeah, I saw a red box the other day next to a McDonald's, and I couldn't believe that it was still there and still operational. Who had a DVD player? But it is quite interesting when you look at how you can take a failure and learn from it and build and continue to push forward on things that are working. It allows you to reinvest that energy and push and continue to grow what you've got going on. You said 108 bushel soybeans. Is that the best soybeans you've ever grown?
Yes. Yep. And I've went over 100 several times with relay crops, and I always, if you get in good soil types and you're conservative with your wheat, you can actually raise better soybeans. And it's a function of exponential math and crop architecture. And I ripped up a bean plant over there to just show people what a bean is capable of, where he ran them over and it had like a foot or two to live. And that's the whole name of the game with all this polycropping, is build these plants and focus on the plant yield and the time sequences and the perceptions.
If I take you back to social media wise, there's not a lot of people on social media that show their mistakes. So we just talked about meat, and then didn't pan out. We might have lost money, but we broke even maybe, or something in that nature. Being first-time farmer, I've tried to show some mistakes online because it's not all peaches and cream, and nobody at the coffee shop says, "Oh man, my yield is just," they don't say that. What's the reception from the rest of the world if you posted some of this stuff?
As far as failure?
Yeah, as far as failure. Everybody loves, like, oh, okay, you got 100 and, whatever bushel beans. Hey, that's fantastic. Oh, great, he's doing that over there. But nobody really says, I'm going to lose 80 grand this year.
There's a lot of
humility, I guess.
Told you so's, but I feel like people have my back a little bit. So,
there's still people that challenge you.
Oh, yeah. There's not enough people to challenge me. I mean, that's what's more concerning for me. I love criticism. I mean, that means people are awake and they're engaged, and I think that's the number one problem, is we've just kind of taken a back seat and said, "Hey, industry, you tell us what's new. We're here for it. We're here for the trip." And I love these events like you guys are here today. I mean, this is good stuff. So bring it on.
What got you started with the Farm Weird guys here?
Just communication on social media. I mean, me and Zach have communicated for several years before even Stockcropper, and he kind of called me one February when him and Lance and Sheldon were all putting this together, and I was like, that is absolutely brilliant. And I think that first, I was working on the chicken tractor concept, so we kind of did it on our own ways, and both arrived that this is actually magical. Now, I don't know if we're going to get the whole landscape of the Corn Belt to do it, but it works.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Well, speaking of what works, right? The relay cropping works for you.
Yeah.
Do you do that on every acre?
I hope to. We've got a family dynamic to it. My grandpa just passed this year, and I love him to death, but he's kind of reined me back a little bit. And if I would have went after this just balls deep 6 or 8 years ago when I didn't understand it, would be a train wreck. And I think sometimes it's good to fester on things. This will be my 10th year. And I'm not saying I understand it inside and out, but I am comfortable doing it on every acre. But at the same time, you can't have 16 combines. We're not running Dallas. Everything's timely. So I think that's even the wrong goal. If we can get to 25% of our acres, then I can get small grains every 4 years. That's kind of my goal. I'm getting pretty close to that now. But everything has to be timely. I think that's something little talked about, and people don't want to say this. They say you need to be at your family, but I think sometimes you need to not sleep, Bob. And you need to sleep for 2 days. That might make more money than anything.
There you go. What about, I know you and I talked about this early, because we don't have a wheat market really here in Iowa. We'd have to truck it or get it on a rail somewhere, and we just can't grow that good a quality of wheat. We've talked about oats. Is there any other things that are similar to this that could happen in other regions of the company or country?
Yeah, I mean, my big push, I'm a board of director of a big feed mill, and we bag a lot of feed. And, looking at barley, getting that more into value add stuff, but looking at some of these small grains as a feedstock and started to replace some corn. And if corn gets that price point down, the other gets the price point down, and you can justify that. But, any cereal. But the oats is pretty interesting out here. I think he can do some modifications, getting the oats in earlier, out earlier, some fuller season beans, and it's going to be very profitable with this processing in the region.
Yeah, the covers that my in-laws use is rye.
Mm-hmm.
And so we like trying to find locally sourced rye. And typically, since the way it's spread now is it's through a tarrigator and then lightly tilled in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't necessarily care so much about having a great germ because we're putting out more bushels per acre than what we need to. I could see somebody around here being able to grow rye as a cover to get to seed for those that want.
But is it too
more
late?
cover.
Because rye's a later crop, right? For if you want to harvest for seed, it's like mid-July.
Yeah.
That's true. That'd be pushing it, wouldn't
Because
it?
it works for you guys because you're taking it off for feed.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's the same
I
thing.
mean,
We're planting beans back first week or two of June.
Yeah. I mean, you could definitely relay crop it for sure. And I'll try to get Zach to do it. The other method is the over the top, like a stripper header. And a lot of these big combines put a track on them, and then you get a big 45 or 50 foot head. You're only running over like 5% of the surface area. So you could justify going out there and just stripping the heads off the top and using it as weed control.
I've also seen the old, what do you call them, the belt drive. Look like a corn head, but it's a row crop header.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Some people use some of those.
Yeah, those are pretty slick.
Was that
For
a
sure.
John Deere 612?
612A, yeah.
Yep. We actually, I used to work for Pioneer, and we actually used to run that for our research bean trials. It was fun.
Those are pretty slick.
Yep.
That's good. Well, just a couple more minutes here sitting in the sun. Dave, why don't you ask that question you were laughing at?
Well, this is a Farm for Fun episode without the drinks, so rather than talking crops the whole time, if you were an animal, what would you be?
I'd probably be some kind of bird in a warmer climate, I'm guessing, or an apex predator of some sort.
Yeah, I like that.
It's warm enough here. Your clouds went away.
Yes. So as you golf in the backyard, is that your favorite course to play?
No, we're going on a men's trip called the Ron Jeremy Invitational coming up next week.
Where's your mustache?
It's got some pretty good propaganda going, floating around there for the guys. But Northern Michigan, you could not beat Northern Michigan. The color of the water and the hills and everything.
Wow. We should go sometime.
Anything. Yes,
Someone
you
sent
should.
me a golf course in North Dakota the other day that just looks amazing. It's on TikTok.
That would be fun to do, to be able to travel, play these courses, just talk about them, have that experience. We think there should be a farm invitational.
Let's do it. Let's do it next year.
fun.
A handicapped event. Come in, broadcast it, have the speakers that'll whisper it. Jason knows. Looks like he's got a 5-iron.
Can we have a handicap event and a win 'em take 'em all event?
Oh yeah,
too?
I think you could.
Okay.
Get a bunch of big sponsors, big prize pool. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Tanner's pretty good.
Is
We
he?
should do it.
We just set up a golf tournament at every farm show. Farm Progress this week. You guys could go to Farm Progress or come to our golf tournament.
What's your handicap? Do you know?
I get this time of year. I'm pretty much scratch.
Really?
Oh, wow.
I won't get scratch strokes in Michigan because it's a lot tougher. But if you take me at a local course, then I don't shoot par. I'm pretty mad.
You'd get me then. Yeah.
What's your handicap, Tanner?
I'm down to an 8 now.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. It took me. I was a slow start.
What's your weakness?
My weakness? Putting.
Really?
Yeah.
You should see him putt. It's weird. You hold the shaft weird.
I just reverse grip.
Oh, you got like the claw.
Left hand low.
Okay.
It just seems like I'm great at putting it within a foot of the hole, and I just don't make the birdie putts.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, quite interesting. Well, let's wrap up with one of the questions we've been asking all of our guests. And you alluded to a little bit of the answer already. We're wanting to give our listeners a little bit of perspective and maybe some security in their thought process. But how do you juggle work and personal or family life?
Oh, man. I mean,
As you're on a 9-day away from family trip.
well, just make everyone in the family know that they're number one. Be there everything that you can, and also communicate when you have to be away from them, why you have to be there, and make it a priority and knocking it out. And everything just boils down to touch point and communications. If you can't, as long as you're in communication with people and you're honest, then everything takes care of it. So
Yeah, and from what you post online, you take your boys with you a lot during work.
yeah,
They're with you a lot.
yeah, that's good. They're molding little humans.
So before we wrap up, did we miss anything? Is there anything else you want our audience to know as we've reintroduced them to Jason?
No, I always tell people to try things on their farm because everything's a 2 or 3 year process of making it comfortable yourself. You got to sell yourself before anyone else sells you, and then when that knowledge base is so invaluable when we get adversity. So get hard.
And how do they find you? It's X is where you spend
At
most of your
Jason
time?
Mauck 1 on X.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other platforms, or that's the best one to hit?
You can follow me on Facebook, but I'm just a crop dork and family man. That's pretty much it.
I love it. Well, thanks again for spending some time here sitting in the sun. Now let's go enjoy ourselves a field day.
Yeah. Crack a cold one. You deserve it.